it's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation.
What are you people? On dope?
Where you can toke.
I inhale frequently.
Or you can talk.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
Or you can toke and talk.
10 federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
While we talk about toke on Toker Talk Radio.
So, by the way, when it comes to pot, if you're 40 years old, you live in a log cabin in Oregon, you got 12 giant pot plants in your backyard, have a ball.
Live from beautiful Portland, Oregon at Rolla J Studios.
Hey, this is great. Just not cannabis.
Plus your calls live at 971-533-7111.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man and Snoopy Poop Dog.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel? Gateway theory doesn't work. It's a reality.
Holland, is it real? Don't tease me.
We're locking up people that take a couple of puffs of marijuana, and the next thing you know, they got 10 years.
And now, here's your host, the guru of ganja graphics, the sultan of sativa statistics, and the worst nightmare of a reefer-mad prohibitionist. A polite, perspicacious, productive pothead with a propensity for PowerPoint. Radical Russ Belville.
Welcome back, everybody. Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio on the air. So glad you can be here with us. All sorts of interesting topics to discuss. Missouri's right to farm amendment seems a little redundant, but glad it's there. Also, this religious use permit for the Roger Williams National Park in Rhode Island. We'll talk a little bit about that. Also, stories coming up. We got to talk about cast member of The Walking Dead busted for weed and worse. We'll tell you about that. Also, Willie Nelson copping to smoking on the White House roof in 1977. That's in his new memoir. We'll discuss that. Also, we've got Tennessee. The clock is ticking on a marijuana referendum. Tennessee Normal's been trying to put that together. And a report on the only government-owned pot shop in the United States. We'll tell you how it's doing right there in North Bonneville, Washington. But first, let's get back to all of the religious talk, because I just posted the slides from Alan Gordon. Very well written and researched stuff. And yeah, it's about 32 pages long. My chat room's going, good grief, I'm not reading all that. I was like, well, I did. And there's some points in it, and I knew this would be more detail oriented. And I didn't want to take up my caller's time. I didn't want to take my guest's time up with my opinions on these things. I want to get their opinions on them. I think they represented themselves very well. But anytime I get around this religious use of cannabis argument, it makes my head hurt a little. There's some parts that kind of bug me, and I want to talk a little bit about them here. Before I do, though, we've only got what do we got here? 3 minutes in this segment. All right, let's wait on that can of worms for just a second. I want to address Higher Ground TV. I've been going back and forth with them on Twitter. And, I think as time goes on, I'm just going to keep being the devil's lettuce advocate here and angering some people. But I hope folks out there can understand that when I present these controversial opinions in our community, it doesn't mean I'm on the other guy's side. I'm not for prohibition. I'm not for restrictions on medical marijuana. I'm not for the arrest and prosecution of cannabis consumers in any way whatsoever. I'm on your side. But I like to play devil's advocate sometimes because, well, frankly, there's some bullshit on our side that needs to be called out. And better I call it out and we get our ducks in a row than we try to trot that bullshit out on the mainstream and get called on it publicly, right? So that's some of my attitude sometimes. So here's where we went in this little Twitter thing, right? Is today I had posted up on High Times my essay on legalization is not to blame for changes to the medical marijuana programs, right? And we've heard my arguments on this before, right? Higher Ground responds on Twitter, it's not, but it's time you respect and acknowledge that fixes must be made. And that kind of caught my eye because I was like, wait a minute. Who says I don't acknowledge that there's a clusterfuck going on with Washington State medical marijuana? Absolutely there is. It's not like I'm cheering, yay, they reduced plant counts, yay, they're closing dispensaries. What I'm trying to do is explain why that happened and to try to inform our side about the perspective from the outside that I think too many times our side ignores. We get trapped in our little echo chamber. Marijuana, cannabis is amazing medicine. Cannabis will cure cancer. Hemp will save the planet. Things that are true, but in our little echo chamber, right? We don't recognize sometimes the perspective that we're casting to the outside world that leads to some of this reactionary, these reactions from them. So that's the point of those articles. But as we went through, I replied, I said, agreed. If it were up to me, there'd be no medical versus recreational. There'd just be commercial versus personal with medical limits for all and no tax for medical. The response from Higher Ground was, up to us, they'd let folks grow cannabis like tomatoes. No limits, no taxes, no problem. And you know what I think about the whole tilt analogy? Treat it like tomatoes, tilt. I responded, no, not like tomatoes. Nobody fears their kid hopping your fence to steal tomatoes to sneak to school to sell to kids who get high. The response from Higher Ground, that's fucking reefer madness, man. Lock up your wine and liquor and meds in the cabinet, and hopefully your guns for real. To which I responded, right, Higher Ground, so not like tomatoes, which nobody ever locks up in a cabinet, right? And then the response was, you've smoked too much of the devil's weed. Start making sense or you'll lose all of us who support you. And this is where I get upset. It's like, look, if you want to stop following me, if you want to not support me because I said something that crashed your little perfect view of cannabis, please unfriend me now, unsubscribe now, stop downloading the podcast now. If you want someone who agrees 100% with you at all times, talk to yourself in a mirror. That's not what you're going to get from me. You're going to get challenged. You're going to get me questioning some of these, some of these sacred cows in our movement. That's why I'm here. And to the point, I went back and I said, look, Higher Ground, you said, treat it like tomatoes. Then you said, lock up your meds. Who the hell locks up their tomatoes? Pot ain't tomatoes, people. We have to, as a movement, as a community, recognize the basic truth that marijuana is a substance that impairs the mind, the attitude, that maybe not impaired is the right word, alters the mind, alters attitudes, alters our physical perceptions. We have to admit that base truth or we lose all credibility with the mainstream. 420 Radio, your ticket to the Boston Freedom Rally.
420 Radio is brought to you by Sacred Serum, who is focused on creating elegant and sophisticated cannabis solutions through its line of dispensers and vaporizers that come preloaded with the world's finest cannabis concentrate. Sacred Serum's concentrate is made on pharmaceutical-grade supercritical CO2 extraction machines that use absolutely no butane or other toxic chemicals. The Vesica, the company's innovative new way to dab and frost, is now available in dispensaries across California. Sacred Serum, elegance and sophistication concentrated.
Continue the conversation with Radical Russ online. Visit radicalruss.com and email radicalruss@gmail.com.
Science! That's right. Those of you who believe in science, we're going to discuss the religious right to use cannabis. And some areas within that argument that I find to be a little troubling. Maybe that's not the right word. It's weird because I want everyone to have the right to use cannabis. I believe everybody deserves that right. If you believe in a certain creation myth as your excuse, great, I don't care. You're an adult. You're not hurting me. Use some cannabis. You don't need to swear a loyalty oath for that.
Funky Roller.
Oh, yeah.
What's happening, Groovy Cats? This is your Funk Master, Ceremonies Big Daddy, and I want you to join me every Thursday night at 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific, right here at the Funky Roller Ring.
Oh, yeah.
Your home of soul, funk, and disco, baby.
Funky Licious.
There's always a party at the Funky Roller Ring.
Are you tired of storing your herb in back alley baggies? Then keep your herb fresh and protected with Pottles. Pottles are airtight and odor-free. Not to mention they're reusable, BPA-free, and UV-resistant. Pottles come in a variety of sizes, styles, and colors. So go check out Pottles at mypottles.com. Use the code STASH to get an additional 10% off. Again, that's mypottles.com, mypottles.com, and tell them Radical Russ sent you.
This is a journey into sound.
Welcome back, everybody. Samiakos with Wannabe Gangsta, some of our Electric Tuesday music. All right, so I want to get back to this case of, this request for a permit that was forwarded to me by Alan Gordon, this federal religious cannabis permit of Ann Armstrong and Alan Gordon. Okay, and there's one part in this, it's got a list of conditions. And the list of conditions includes, number one, the permittee is prohibited from giving false information. To do so will be considered a breach of conditions and be grounds for revocation. Prohibited from giving false information. And to me, in the context of a religious ceremony, I mean, that's kind of by definition, right? Well, maybe not. But just the fact that there exist many, many dozens of different Christian denominations, doesn't that tell us that all of them but one are giving out false information? I mean, if they're all the one true religion, right? I mean, that's kind of, my basic problems with religion. But when it comes to this permit here, the number two condition is the permittee shall comply with all federal, state, county, and municipal laws, ordinances, regulations, codes, and the terms and conditions of this permit. Failure to do so may result in the immediate suspension of the permitted activity or the termination of the permit. Now, the only two official things from the U.S. Department of the Interior at the Roger Williams National Memorial is this letter from the department, from Jennifer Smith, who's been working with them, that gives them the permit as a First Amendment event. And it says, this permit does not grant permission to undertake any activity that may violate applicable federal, state, or municipal laws or regulations. This includes the Controlled Substances Act, the laws of the state of Rhode Island governing the possession or the use of Controlled Substances Act, and 36 CFR Section 2.35, which prohibits the illegal possession or delivery of controlled substances within the national park system. I would also include in that the provisions of the Cole Memorandum that specifically say, hey, one of the 8 federal priorities is that we don't have marijuana on federal property. Now, I'm not saying that to say they shouldn't be doing it. But to me, this activity that they're going to be taking part in is no different than the activity that N.A. Poe and Chris Goldstein and I can't remember the guy's name, dang it. Don DeZam, is that his name? I think so. Don DeZarn? I'm not sure. Anyway, but those guys out in Philly that they go to the Liberty Bell and they did the smoke down prohibition. So I'm going to be a little upset if Chris Goldstein, my friend, had to have gotten a federal criminal record and serve probation and be subjected to piss tests and be forbidden from visiting the Liberty Bell. I'm going to be upset if Chris has to undergo that. Meanwhile, someone who claims a religious use to do the same exact thing gets to walk scot-free. And not that I'm upset that the religious user gets to walk scot-free. I'm upset that Chris Goldstein has to do time and has to pay fines and surrender some of his liberty because he didn't profess a belief in a certain creation myth. He didn't profess a belief in a certain holy book. The only thing he found holy was the U.S. Constitution. Now, I do appreciate Alan Gordon mentioning that these rights must go to atheists as well. But then that opens up, someone in the chat room said, had put up special rights for everybody. Which, yeah, it does start to say, well, wait a minute. Look, if you're arguing there's a religious right to use marijuana, that some Bronze Age shepherds millennia ago wrote something down. Hell, they didn't even write it down. It was oral folklore for generations before it was ever written down, and then multiply translated and held by the political ruling caste over an illiterate population and manipulated for political purposes. That if I profess allegiance to that particular book, suddenly I have a right to use cannabis. And like Alan said, no, that right should apply to atheists as well. And to which point I would say, well, then we're not talking about a religious right, are we? We're talking about a right, period. I shouldn't have to, and like you mentioned the Melamede case, it kind of made me giggle, but to have to form a church of science? That to me is an oxymoron, but okay. Why not just our 9th Amendment right that recognizes just because we wrote rights in the Constitution doesn't mean that's all the rights you have? How about just recognizing that human beings, adults, should have the right to do unto their body what they choose so long as they harm no others? How about recognizing that there's nothing in the federal Constitution that gives the federal government the right to declare life illegal? That's where I really wish the arguments were. And it just sucks from my point of view that we have to make up stories in order to use cannabis. And, I bring up that point about, well, certainly the cannabists, Ann Armstrong, Alan Gordon, and the folks that they know to be sincere adherents, certainly they're sincere. They really believe that Exodus 30 has the recipe for the anointing oil, and that cannabosum or cannabos was cannabis, even though almost every translation you find of the Bible calls it calamus, right? And then the explanation for that was, well, yeah, it was political. They couldn't say cannabis. They wanted to ban cannabis, so they used calamus instead. Okay, so then you are acceding to my point that this is a multiply mistranslated political agenda document that we're talking about. Okay. But still, it just bothers me, this whole thing, because the way it's written and the way Alan's briefs are written, he said, because the Parks Department ask some questions. How are you going to tell that? Are you going to just let everybody show up and smoke pot, or how do you tell that someone's a sincere religious practitioner? And they said, or Alan said on behalf of Ann and himself, that, we are in this church and only people that we know personally that are in this church that are sincere will get to participate with any cannabis. So if I were to show up to this ceremony on May 23rd as an atheist, I could pray with them. I could watch them pray. I could hang out with them, but they're not going to give me any of the Holy Sacrament because I don't think it's a holy sacrament. You see where where it feels weird? If I'm a atheist and I show up at that Grand Canyon Catholic service, like they kept mentioning that there's this, the national park allows Catholics to give communion wine out at their services at the Grand Canyon. Even as an atheist, even as someone who thinks the Catholic religion is full of bunk, they'd give me the wine. I'd be allowed to use the wine. So, is it only a holy sacrament for people who believe in it?
Rabba-dabba-goo!
Oh well. We'll talk more about that and some other stories coming up after the break. But it's 4:20 here in the Pacific time zone. Time for us to go to our union-mandated safety meeting. We all want to be safe, don't we? We got Electric Bob calling in next for our Electric Tuesday Daily Toker Tunes. Track from Greenleaf coming up next.
.420 Radio, freeing your mind 24 hours a day. Oregon has joined Washington and Colorado in legalizing marijuana. We're Portland NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws chapter in Portland, Oregon. Join us as we celebrate the launch of an exciting new era in marijuana freedom in Oregon. Our job has just begun. Powerful interests want to white out the most important portions of Oregon's legalization law. By joining Portland NORML, you add your voice to the thousands who voted for Measure 91 and want it to be implemented as written. The people have spoken. Now it is time for the legislature to obey the will of the people. Find out more about Portland NORML at portlandnormal.org. Attend our monthly membership meetings on the fourth Saturday of the month. See our website for more details. Portland NORML, ensuring responsible adult marijuana consumers are afforded the same rights, privileges, and responsibilities as beer drinkers.
Tokers, there's no good reason to get your dog stoned. While it might not harm them physically, imagine being a dog who already begs for treats all day, and then imagine that dog having the munchies. Not cool.
The Fingerboard Extension has fretted instruments to enhance your creativity. It has new and used guitars and banjos from beginning to high class. The Fingerboard Extension has National Resophonic, Husson Dalton, Larrabee, Heritage and Recording King guitars, and Mike Ramsey, Wildwood, Gold Tone, and Recording King banjos. The Fingerboard Extension also has drum stuff, used gear, and parts. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension, downtown Corvallis, Oregon at 120 Northwest 2nd, or check out the inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com and reverb.com.
Yeah, come to the weed shop, yeah, that's where we shop. Shop at weedshop.com. Come to the weed shop, yeah, that's where we shop. Shop at weedshop.com. Whether it's a vape, pen, a pipe, or a bong, you can find it right now on weedshop.com. We got dab rings, nails, and ship it fast, whipping any of a competitor's glass. Come to the weed shop, yeah, that's where we shop. Shop at weedshop.com. Come to the weed shop, yeah, that's where we shop. Shop at weedshop.com.
Everyone knows music and marijuana go together, so let's wind up our 20 after break with the Russ Belville Show's Daily Toker Tunes, the best in pod-safe 420 music from around the web. Today is Electric Tuesday, featuring the latest in electronic dance music and other cutting-edge genres. Now, sit back and enjoy your Daily Toker Tune.
Welcome back, everyone. 23 and a half after the hour, and Electric Bob is out today, busy doing his Electric Bob stuff, whatever that might be. But we'll get right to the tune here for you. This is Greenleaf with Next Station.
420 Radio, your ticket to Seattle Hemp Fest. Get.Buzz. .Buzz is the internet platform that fuels community interest, excitement, and new experiences. .Buzz is the premier online destination for internet users seeking the latest news on a variety of topics. .Buzz appeals to groups active in blogging, communications, journalism, advertising, and marketing. .Buzz offers registrants a stronger alternative to the shrinking namespace of existing top-level domain names, such as .com, .net, and .org. Get your name now at get.buzz. Growing plants indoors can be a rewarding hobby, but electricity bills can go through the roof. Then you have to cool down all those big hot lights. It can drive a grower insane. With Lush LED lighting, you can solve many of these issues and double your rewards. Matt and his scientists have developed the perfect light for flowering plants with far less cost and heat. And the results? Very effective. Check out LushLEDlighting.com right now and tell them Radical Russ sent you.
Big Daddy thinks.
Funky roller. What's happening? Big Daddy here, and I want you cool cats to come and chill over at my pad, the Funky Roller Ring.
Oh yeah.
We'll be grooving every Thursday night, right here on 420 Radio. Funky Roller Ring.
What can I do when you got me going?
Hey everybody, it's Radical Russ here from 420 Radio, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
Feeling my way through the darkness, guided by a beating heart. I can't tell where the journey will end.
Welcome back, everyone. That's music from Avicii with Wake Me Up. You're listening to Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio, second hour of the Russ Belville Show on 420radio.org. And just continuing this discussion of the Roger Williams case, the religious use of cannabis permit for the national park in Rhode Island on May 23rd, 2015. And reading through some of the documents, there's some interesting points here that merit discussion. On a document emailed to the National Park Service on April 14th, our guest wrote, this is Alan Gordon's writing, and he wrote a number of points about this permit in question. And there's some stuff in here that I just want to get to. And basically, he makes 21 points here where he says, in order to prevent litigation, which we feel sure of winning but would prefer not to file. And the idea being here that if the permit wasn't granted, they're threatening a lawsuit on religious use grounds. Now, the previous lawsuits that have gone forth on religious use of cannabis, you're going to find a whole bunch of people who made those claims who are now serving time. Plenty of time in a cell to read their holy book, because so far the courts haven't been too sanguine on this idea of religious cannabis use. And in the defense of this, I feel like, again, we have a case where sometimes we're in the echo chamber and we don't see how things are perceived. So let me get to one of these things. A lot of this is based on the RFRA, the Religious Freedoms Restoration Act, 42 U.S. Code Chapter 21B. And the Religious Freedom Restoration Act happened because there was a case here in Oregon where the employment department would not give unemployment benefits to a worker who got fired for testing positive for a hallucinogen that he used in a religious ceremony. And because of that Supreme Court case that denied him his unemployment benefits, that's when Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to provide that the government has to clear a little bit of higher hurdles, has to clear higher hurdles if it wants to do a complete ban on something considered to be a religious sacrament to people of a certain religion. So the problem here is that the case that they want to base this on, the case that came forth in the, with respect to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, was Gonzalez versus O Centro Espírita Beneficente União do Vegetal. My apologies for the accent. Abbreviated UDV. The UDV case was this case of these adherents to a Brazilian religion, this native Brazilian religion, and their use of ayahuasca tea, which contains dimethyltryptamine. That's DMT. It's a powerful hallucinogen. And the Supreme Court decided 8-0 that a complete ban on ayahuasca tea was not appropriate for these religious users. And part of what they had to go through is 3 tests. One test is called the compelling interest test. The government must prove a compelling interest in a ban without an exception. And in the UDV case, the justices held, you can't just say, 'cause it's illegal. There has to be a reason why it's illegal. Okay? So in the case of the ayahuasca, you can say, hey, it's illegal. It's on Schedule 1. Why is it illegal on Schedule 1? Well, it's a powerful hallucinogen. It's a dangerous drug. Has no medical use. But there's other tests they have to go. The essential test is that the ban is essential to the compelling interest. The compelling interest in the government's case is to prevent everyone from using ayahuasca. And the least restrictive means test is the third test, which says they have to show that a total ban is the least they could do to achieve their compelling interest. Like if there was a lesser way to maintain their compelling interest, they have to take it. So the government's compelling interest, as these cases have been adjudicated, is these are controlled substances, and our compelling interest is to ban people from using them because they're dangerous. And in the UDV case, the justices held basically that that's not the least restrictive means, that there is a way by which we can allow an exception to these very sincere practitioners of a very small, very detailed, specific Brazilian religion. If we let those guys use, it's not going to stop us from banning it for everyone. It's not going to have a significant effect on banning it for everyone. Number one, like Ann Armstrong mentioned, not a lot of people are going to switch religions to some obscure Brazilian religion just to be able to use ayahuasca tea. Number two, the use of ayahuasca tea in general in the country is negligible. So it wasn't going to stop the government from maintaining Schedule 1 DMT to allow a few people in a religion to sip on this ayahuasca. The problem with the cannabis part in trying to determine that that's a holy sacrament is the government has repeatedly ruled that your sacrament's too popular and too fungible. And the case here, the compelling interest again, is for the government to keep us from using cannabis because it's a deadly, dangerous drug. Now, in his points here, he makes some points about, it's not deadly dangerous. It's safer than alcohol. It's got medical purposes, which is true. Those things are absolutely true, but they mean nothing in the court of law, unfortunately. We've seen this recently with the case where a normal lawyer tried to get marijuana determined unconstitutional under Schedule 1, and all it had to do is pass the rational basis test, which is, well, there's some controversy, so we can't decide. So the compelling interest of the government to keep all of us from using marijuana is substantially burdened if they allow religious practitioners to claim it's a sacrament, because so many people use marijuana. And the people that use marijuana aren't easily identifiable as adherents to a particular religion. And that if this religious exemption is granted, suddenly there's going to be a whole bunch of churches of the Holy Leaf sprouting up from city to city, state to state, claiming this religious exemption. So that's my theory on to why, as to what's happening here is I think that Jennifer Smith, in this case, the National Park Service, have decided to not set a precedent. They haven't specifically said, yes, you have a permit to use marijuana religiously. All they've said is you have a permit to do your First Amendment rights to have a prayer ceremony. And I think they're trying to play a little bit of, okay, whatever you do is whatever you do. And I don't think they want to bust these people because I don't think they want the firestorm of media coverage on this issue that it's going to get. And it is Rhode Island. I don't think there's going to be a prosecutor there who's going to want to, get a hard on for attacking these people who are using small, tiny amounts of marijuana. But it again brings me back to Chris Goldstein having to suffer this year and under his probation and having a federal record just because he didn't subscribe to some religion. So those kind of things bother me. And there's other parts in this document that bother me. And that is, he makes a point here about the wielder of discretion. And that would be Jennifer Smith in this case, the person from National Park Service. Pointing out, at least from his perspective, from Alan Gordon's perspective, that if she were to ban, if she were to not issue the permit, which again she has, but if she were to not issue the permit, her judgment would be invalid in doing so because of the risk of bias by factually incorrect language in the law. Basically, he says, the law says cannabis is a hallucinogen, and it's not. The law says cannabis has no medical value, and it does. And the law uses the word marijuana, which is let's see if I can find it, racially, ethnically, culturally, religiously pejorative language. In other words, he's trying to say that since we call it marijuana, and marijuana is a racist slang term, she can't make a reasoned decision about this case because she's already been prejudiced by the propaganda of the word marijuana. So like I said, I'm on these guys' side in the case of it being a civil disobedience in a sense. But some of the legal planks he's trying to lay here as the platform for a possible, suit on this seem a little shaky to me. Although he likes to say it's a bit of a slam dunk for us and would be a capricious waste of federal resources should it be fought. And I agree to the point that it's always a waste of federal resources to bust anyone for marijuana. I get this bad taste in my mouth whenever we talk about special rights, special privileges for certain groups because of their excuse for using marijuana. Well, I'm a patient. I'm sick. Therefore, I shouldn't be busted. Oh, I'm a believer. I have religion. Therefore, I shouldn't be busted. How about more fighting for all of us not to be busted? And this idea that the only people they're going to allow to use cannabis at the event, and let's see, they say, let's see if I can find that part. Will you be distributing cannabis? We will share cannabis-based sacred matter with fellow cannabists. That's what they call their religion, cannabists. How much cannabis do you expect each attendee to consume? What will be the methods for the consumption of the cannabis? And this is interesting to me because in their documentation, they write up how, cannabis is the kannabos of the original Hebrew, which most religious scholars have translated as calamus. Now, is that because of the political pressures to not reference cannabis? Is that because cannabis was banned and we had to pick a different word for it? Sure, maybe that's the case. But remember that part earlier about can't deliver false information or else they get their permit pulled? Could that be a case of false information under someone's interpretation? Furthermore, they talk about how they're going to be giving 1 or 2 drops of holy anointing oil from the recipe from the book of Exodus, chapter 30, or book 30, chapter 23, verse 23. Chapter 30, verse 23. Sorry. That contains primarily olive oil, along with cannabis, or cannabis, okay, cinnamon, which cinnamon, right? And then this part, and this is interesting to me, flowing myrrh. You remember gold, frankincense, and myrrh from the nativity scene, right? Flowing myrrh. But then in parentheses, they say moringa oil, since modern myrrh does not flow. So this is the holy anointing oil, and God himself created this recipe. But you can just substitute some other ingredient in there? Since we don't have flowing myrrh anymore, we can just substitute moringa oil? So, it's like, if it's holy and sacred, then shouldn't it be absolute as well? If you're allowing for the flowing myrrh to be moringa oil, why then must cannabis be required as part of the, and what I'm saying is if you can substitute the myrrh, why can't you substitute the cannabis? Doesn't that kind of undercut the argument that cannabis is absolutely sacred and necessary? Another part they have is they indicate that the anointing oil is going to also contain cardamom. And in parentheses, he mentions kata, often translated as cassia, but which cannot be cassia, since cassia is just a toxic variety of cinnamon. Oh, so it's possible that some of the ingredients written down in Exodus 30:23 have been mistranslated over time? But that doesn't apply to the cannabis, possibly? It's just, this thing seems shaky on their own premise, is what I'm saying. Anyway, that's enough talking about religion. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll finish up with some non-religious stories having to do with marijuana. Stick around. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show on Toker Talk Radio.
Don't touch that dial. We're right back to Radical Russ in just a few minutes. Hey, does anybody really have a dial anymore? Huh? You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
All right, when we come back, we've got our final segment of the day. Some more stories coming up on the world's first government-run pot shop in Washington State. We've also got Tennessee running out of time in Nashville for decrim, and a look at a Walking Dead cast member busted for pot. You're listening to Toker Talk Radio.
.420 Radio, your ticket to the High Times Cannabis Cups. Adam Hand of Handmade Apparel produces quality custom designs for t-shirts, hats, and other apparel. Handmade Apparel is the official design shop for 420 Radio among many clients who rely on Adam Hand for everything from short-run custom projects to full-run clothing lines. Visit handmadeapparel.biz to browse the selection of handmade gear or to get a personal quote for your own designs. Handmade Apparel, a proud supporter of 420radio.org.
There's so much I worry about as a mom. Stephen Harper thinks that organized crime should continue to profit from marijuana prohibition. Imagine regulating marijuana like alcohol and cigarettes with a strong and clear educational message, making it more difficult for my kids and your kids to access. Drug dealers don't ask for ID. Stephen Harper does not have the kind of judgment we need to protect our children, authorized by the Normal Women's Alliance of Canada.
This is Radical Russ encouraging you to take a look at the Weed Blog every day. Johnny Green and the staff at the Weed Blog are on top of all the latest developments in the fight to end marijuana prohibition nationwide. You can even get the Weed Blog on your smartphone by installing the Weed Blog app for iPhone and Android. If it's about weed, it's on the Weed Blog, including my original writing. So don't delay. Read the Weed Blog today.
Welcome back, everyone. Final segment of Toker Talk Radio. That's Beach Club crossed with Relic. A little mashup called Enlightenment. That reminds me, Electric Bob's Boogaloo is up later tonight. 8 p.m. Pacific time. You can catch the latest in house, trance, electronic, dubstep, and more. Electric Bob's Boogaloo tonight at 8 p.m. Pacific time with replays coming up at 11 p.m. Pacific time on Friday and Saturday night. Get your dance on. All right, quick rundown of some of the other stories that fell through the cracks. Peachtree City, Georgia, police busted Father Gabriel from The Walking Dead. The actor's name is Seth K. Gilliam. He's 46 years old. And he was arrested for driving at speeds over 107 miles per hour on a state highway. Cops say that he was applying his brakes when he blew by them, so he was probably going faster than 107 when they finally got the clock on him. But 107 miles an hour, they took him into custody, and they smelled alcohol in his breath and found a doobie in a cigarette pack that he put in the armrest of the door. He claims that he usually drives a Jeep, and this car was a rental, and he couldn't, felt different. It's going whole lot faster, you see, because, 110 in a rental car feels like, 60 in a Jeep. Right. They gave him a field sobriety test with his consent and registered a blood alcohol reading of 0.107. He says he consumed 3 beers and 1 shot of alcohol before getting behind the wheel. And according to this, apparently he was on his way to work. So, wow, man. Okay, so Father Gabriel. Yeah, busted with the doobie. But at least this one doesn't indicate that he was under the influence of marijuana in any way. He was just busted with some weed on him. But folks, this is Georgia, and things will not be good for him. Georgia already has a per se DUID law for any amount of cannabis found in one system. It's a mandatory 24 hours in jail. But toxicology report apparently hasn't come out yet, or they haven't mentioned it, but nothing there. All right. My problem with this story is the driving 110 miles an hour down the highway, drunk or sober. It's weird. I'm the marijuana guy, right? I'm all Mr. Outlaw when it comes to marijuana, but when it comes to traffic laws, I'm kind of a stickler. I kind of like the idea that the people around me in speeding 2,000 pound bullets are obeying all the laws. I'm even the kind of guy that doesn't do the rolling California stop at the stop sign, man. I come to a full stop at the stop sign. I rarely, if ever, drive 3 miles an hour over the speed limit, right? I'm all about following those traffic laws because, it's not just your life, it's other people's lives you're putting at risk here. So my pox on this guy is the speeding over 100 miles an hour on a highway. And then exacerbated by the fact he'd been drinking before. Sad story. All right, another story that we got to let you know about in Tennessee. Tennessee Normal has been trying to collect 6,847 signatures. They've got 4,000 signatures. And this would be a decrim that they're trying to get on the August 6th ballot. They got 13 days left to get signatures. And folks, if they need 6,800, it really means they need about 8,000 or 9,000 signatures. So it's not looking positive for the Tennessee Normal chapter to be able to get decrim on the ballot. They would have to exceed the number of signatures they already have in less than 2 weeks. So sad news there. But if you want to help them out, check out tnnormal.org. TN Normal for Tennessee Normal. Also, news from the Pacific Northwest. North Bonneville, Washington is home to the nation's only city-owned pot shop. The pot shop's called Cannabis Corner. It's just off State Highway 14 in North Bonneville, just over the river from Oregon. It's on the Columbia Gorge. And the Cannabis Corner, the city, the mayor there, the former city administrator, John Spencer, when this first opened, brought up the point that, hey, there's going to be legal pot. Why shouldn't the city benefit from it? And if the city runs the shop, have a better shot at keeping some control over it. And so under their initial projections, Josh Spencer predicted that the city-owned pot shop would generate $2.7 million of sales in its first year and a profit of $225,000. Now, that's a big chunk of change to this little city. Little city has an annual budget of about $1.2 million. So we're talking about, making up, a sixth of their budget just from pot profits? Well, the problem is the city pot shop is just struggling to break even. Sales only reached about $68,000 in March. In April, the sales climbed 15%, got to $87,500 in gross sales, and that was their break-even point. Spencer says, quote, "At this point, I've pretty much thrown out my projections. We're not going to hit those huge numbers we were talking about. All I can say right now is that we're making it." Now, it's not the problem that people aren't coming in. He says he gets about 60 customers a day, about 1,800 customers a month, which is several hundred more customers than Spencer originally figured into his projections. But the problem is they're spending 40% of what he thought they'd spend. Gee, isn't that interesting? You got a 25% plus 25% plus 25% plus state sales tax plus local sales tax on weed. It ends up costing $20, $25, $30 a gram. And what do you know? People are only spending 40% of what you expected. How did that happen? So this is why I applauded there being a city-run pot store, because it'd be nice if the mayor of this town joins with all the other dispensary owners and starts lobbying in Olympia for a reduction in these ridiculous taxes. Now, there are other things that are giving this guy some problems. One is, being cash only. Hasn't been able to use an ATM card. And it's a small town where you have to drive down the street to get to a gas station to get to an ATM, right? So that may change as he adds on a bank account with Salal Credit Union, that Washington credit union that's working with marijuana businesses now. And the store is planning on putting up a large sign on the top of the building. But remember, under Washington law, they can't advertise with a logo. They can't advertise with any sort of green cross or pot leaf or anything like that. So they're just going to put their address up on a billboard and hope that brings some more people into the place. Just so many hurdles to have to jump through. And finally, a little piece of good news. Willie Nelson turned 82 this week. Or was it last week? Sorry. Turned 82 last week. And he's got a new memoir out called It's a Long Story. And in the memoir, he admits to smoking pot on the White House roof. Something that we've all talked about many times, but this is out in print now. According to the story on the New York Daily News, quote, "Days after a brief jail stint in the Bahamas for marijuana possession, Willie Nelson was invited to the White House by Jimmy Carter, who thanked the country superstar for his campaign support. Following a dinner in which the president spoke of his days as a peanut farmer and the singer talked of raising pigs, Nelson says that a White House insider invited him to the roof to look at Washington at night and brought out a joint. Getting stoned on the roof of the White House, you can't help but turn inward," Nelson recalls of the 1977 episode in his memoir, It's a Long Story. Quote, certain philosophical questions come to mind, like, how the fuck did I get here? So that's Willie Nelson's new book. It's out in bookstores, Amazon, all that stuff all around. He traces how he discovered marijuana as a young performer and ended his dependence on alcohol and tobacco, which he blames for his parents' deaths to lung cancer. He says he faced an initial stigma in the clean country world when he embraced marijuana, but he writes, quote, I couldn't betray marijuana any more than I could betray a family member or a lifelong friend. That's because marijuana has never betrayed me. Unlike booze, it has never made me nasty or violent. Unlike cocaine, it never sped me up or fired up my ego. End quote. Great stuff. All right, folks, that's all the time we got for today. Time flies when you legalize. Join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific time for another edition of the Russ Belville Show on 420radio.org. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it,